How's it, everyone? Today I'm going to be speaking about NestJS, which is a Node framework that's taking off. And so this presentation, the goal of my presentation today, is just to intro you to what NestJS is. I'm going to give you a taste of kind of what it is, how to use it, and then I'm going to show you a couple of the features that it already offers as you kick off and start using it. And then finally, I'm going to run through a couple of real-world problems that we've faced, because a lot of the time when we look at a tool or a framework, we look at this cool thing and we tell everyone how cool it is and everything good about it, but we never speak about the bad. So I'm going to speak about a couple of the bad things that we've hit when using it. But just a disclaimer, none of the bad things that we've hit have made us want to move away from the framework. So it is a brilliant framework, and that's why I'm going to be speaking about it today. So GitHub isn't the only way to kind of see how a framework or a tool is taking off, but it is definitely one way to check it out. So what I did was I took a couple of well-known frameworks of different languages and a couple of Node frameworks as well, and just put them all up. So you can see there the top 3 lines. That's Laravel, which is PHP, Rails, which is Ruby, and Express, which is Node. And then I took a couple of other Node frameworks that are relatively well-known. That's Happy.js, Fastify, and Sails. And what you can see in the bottom right is this little blue line, and that's NestJS, and it's exponentially taking off. So you can see that there's actually quite a lot of growth in NestJS, and a lot of people are interested in it and want to start using it. And if we look at kind of the ages of these different frameworks, you can see that Laravel, Ruby, and Express are all over 8 years old. So they mature frameworks that have been around for a really long time. If we look at Nest, you can see that it's actually just over 2 years old. It's already overtaken Happy, Happy has been around for quite a while, and it's catching up to Sails. And Sails is one of the Node frameworks that I think is relatively well known. It wraps up a lot of libraries together, and just as a side thought, what I kind of describe as a framework is something that takes a number of packages, puts them all together in one place, and makes them all speak together without you having to do all of the linkage and the glue. So that's kind of what we're calling a framework. And you can see that Nest is a really young framework, but it's getting a lot of stars. So that's why I'm speaking about it today. There's a huge amount of support for it, and it's been pushed by pretty big names. So how do you get started with this whole thing? So they have a CLI where you can just install the CLI on your computer, and you create your new project, and it automatically installs all of your dependencies. You CD into it and you start it up, and that's it. You've already got a REST API started, and if you hit the root endpoint, you get hello world. So it's a really simple thing to get started with. And now what I'm going to do is just run you through kind of the features that it has and why we find a lot of value with that. So just to give you a bit of context, we're a startup company. We're 9 people, and we have to move really quickly because we service small and medium-sized businesses. So these are guys that want to test kind of a concept out and see if it works, and if it does work, then they want to move quickly on it, and if it doesn't work, they want to throw it away. That's the first thing. The second thing is that with a small and medium business, once they have proven that a prototype works, they often don't want to throw that away and start over. So you kind of have to build it right from the start. You need to make sure that stuff is working well from the start, because you can't say, okay, cool, I'm going to rewrite exactly what took us 2 or 3 weeks to do. I'm going to rewrite that now for the next phase, because they're going to say, well, you've already done it, so let's just use what's there. So we try to make sure that we're designing things right from the start, but also we try to find a lot of things, that tools and IDEs and everything, that make it easier for us to develop and pick up errors before we get into production. So for example, a lot of hackers in the room and stuff would probably say that they use like Sublime or Vim or something as their editor to code in, because it's super fast and all of that stuff. From our perspective, we say we'll rather use an IDE like WebStorm, because we'll pick up a lot more issues beforehand, and so we won't be pushing problems up into production that way. So that's kind of the thought process that goes through our mind when we look at frameworks and at products and stuff to use. So one of the huge benefits that we see in NestJS, which I think is a controversial topic, and some of you guys might disagree, is that it's fully written in TypeScript. So Basically what TypeScript is it's a language that compiles down to JavaScript, and that means that we can already compile and pick up compilation errors, number one. And number two, it introduces a lot of the new kind of JavaScript protocols and JavaScript, I can't think of the word, but it basically just introduces new stuff that hasn't gotten into JavaScript yet, but it's going to come soon. So for example, decorators, which make your code a lot easier to read. So we use a lot of that, and we use async, which makes your node code look sequential, not asynchronous. So it looks like it's sequential and it's easy to read, but actually there are a lot of things going on in the background and stuff like that, and we don't have all these callbacks. And finally, because TypeScript can actually just run JavaScript's code, we have access to all of the NPM packages. So it's not locking us down, it's not removing functionality from using Node, it's actually just building on top of that. Another thing, and a huge strength that we see in TypeScript, is it almost forces you to type your code and make sure that you know what objects are going into a function, you know what to expect coming in. And so some people might say, you can use Node and you can use ESLint and you can kind of do that anyway, which is cool, and you can, but in this case it kind of forces you to do it. So there's a lot of strength in that, because then everyone coding has to do it. So it's nice to kind of just put down these ground rules that everyone has to follow. So that's just TypeScript in general. When you go into this project, you're going to see a lot of .ts files. And the first 3 TS files you're going to see is appservice.ts, appcontroller.ts, and appmodule.ts. So I'm going to give you a taste of what the code kind of looks like. This code on the screen here is a service. You can see at the top there's a decorator that says @injectable. What that does is it makes this service injectable into other services and controllers. And I'm going to get into the strength of injectable stuff in a moment. But basically you can see that the main concept from this is the @injectable above the class. The next file that you would click on is the controller. And this is what a controller looks like. You have @controller as your decorator, and inside there you can see the string users. What that means is that it's now created the REST endpoint /users. And in the function below you can see an @get. That now means that if you call get on the user's endpoint, it's going to call this function and it's going to return whatever that function returns. So literally you can make a controller, put in your endpoint, and you can put an @get function, and you've made a new REST API endpoint. It's that simple. What you can also see in this, and this is the important part, is that there's this private read-only service, user service in the constructor. That's the injection. So you don't actually create the user service in this controller, it gets injected into the controller. And I'm going to get to the strength of that in a moment. The final thing that you're going to see is a module. So a module takes your services and your controllers, and it basically makes sure that the Nest framework knows to bring up those controllers and to create those services. And it also allows you to break up your code into small pieces. And each module can import other modules, and it can export services and controllers, so you can reuse parts of your code everywhere else. So this allows you to have very modular code. So that's kind of if you just open these 3 files, you understand these 3 files, you're able to make a REST API. It's that simple. Then on top of that, Nest has a lot of plugins and stuff that they offer right out of the box. So if we look at authentication, they've created a wrapper around Passport, which means that you've got JWT authentication, token bearer authentication, and a number of other things. So it already makes it really easy for you to create authentication and lock down your API. The second thing is with the database. They use an ORM called TypeORM. You don't have to use TypeORM. You can use whatever you want. You can use Sequelize or a number of other ones. But TypeORM is the one that they've made a wrapper for, so it makes it really easy to create entities and models around your database, and just create new databases and everything as soon as you need them. So for rapid development, it's really amazing. And then for WebSockets, their base WebSocket platform is Socket.io. Again, you can swap that out with whatever you want, but the base one that they've created a wrap around is Socket.io. They've got GraphQL support, and their documentation, and this is a really cool one, is they've created a number of decorators that you can decorate your functions in your controller with. So you write your documentation and your code in the same place, and you can create your examples and everything. And when someone hits that docs endpoint, they get presented with Swagger docs of your whole API. So it makes it really cool and easy to make documentation for a fully open API. So that's something that I haven't really seen in a number of other places. A lot of the time you have to comment above your code and everything. This is all decorated code, and it's a live API documentation that someone hits on the browser. And then another thing that they offer is validation. So when you're using frameworks, you often see that when traffic comes in, you create a validator and you say, okay, cool, this email must be a string and it must exist and all of that stuff. They've kind of broken that out into, they've abstracted it a bit more. So you create these classes and you specify your validation in the classes. And in your controllers, you just expect that class to arrive. And when the data comes in, it creates the class and it validates and everything automatically, and it returns errors automatically. So your controllers are actually quite small. They don't have the validators in them, and it makes it really readable. It makes your code look really, really good. And when you go into those classes, you can see the kind of validation that takes place. So they've done really well with that sort of stuff. And the final thing, which we haven't really had to focus on a lot, is microservice support. So in this case, you don't have to always use an HTTP protocol to communicate between two different services. What microservices does is it allows you to use different transport layers. So what you can now do is send commands and events and all of that stuff between different modules. So they have microservice support, and currently just out of the box you can do Redis, RabbitMQ, MQTT, and basically a number of other things that are publish, subscribe, or event-based paradigms. So they've really thought about not only the HTTP side of things, but the rest of your system and how you're going to break it out and make everything a module. Okay, so those are kind of the plugins that you get. And on top of that, you also get the internal functionality that Nest provides. So the three things that I would talk about is pipes, number one. What that allows you to do is when traffic comes in, when you get a post request, you might expect some kind of data to come in under ID or company registration in this case. And you can just pass it through a pipe. And that pipe will automatically format that data for you if you want. And it can also validate that data for you and throw an exception if it's not correct. So number one, you're making sure that the data coming in is consistent. And number two, you're able to modify it as much as you want. You can take it further than just piping one little piece of a body. You can pipe the whole body into a class, and it will automatically get rid of all the keys that shouldn't be there. It will automatically make sure that that class is valid, and it will make sure that the data is there. So you can check stuff like, is this ID number of this person a legit South African ID number? Is the cell phone number that's coming in an actual cell phone number? And a number of other things. The other thing that I would mention is guards. So you can do auth guards, you can do role-based guards, you can make any kind of guard that you want. That means that you can lock down your API not only using authentication, but you can also say only admin users can go here, or only people that have permission for this view can go here. So there's a lot of stuff that they offer out of the box that allows you to really control what people have access to and lock down your API. And the final thing is interceptors. And this concept is really cool. What you can do is intercept incoming traffic and outgoing traffic, and you can just modify that data or trigger events from that data. So an example would be that you log every single incoming event. But that's kind of slightly boring. Another one that you could do is maybe you're working on a new feature, you bring that feature up, and you just want to make sure that if there's ever an error that happens, you get notified immediately, just while this new feature is up and running. So what you do is you intercept the outgoing traffic, and if there's ever an error, you trigger a Slack notification to yourself. And now you get these instant notifications. So there are a lot of things that you can do with Nest, and this is literally just touching the surface of the stuff that they offer out of the box for this framework. Another thing that I had mentioned before was TypeORM, which is the ORM that lets you kind of create your database models and all of that stuff. And this is what it looks like. So basically all you do is you put an @entity decorator above it, and you specify what the table name is, and then you can put in all of your columns, and this is it. Now, when you npm start and you start up your whole application, it'll create your entities on the database, and you can literally start querying them and using them straight away. So it's so easy to start up an application and just get going. And a lot of applications do need a database, and a lot of them aren't that complicated. They just need 3 or 4 entities. So it's really simple to get going with that. Another strength that a lot of people mention, and okay, so before I mention this, how many of you guys are React developers, like React framework only? Okay, and Angular developers? Okay, well that's actually better. Okay, so with the React developers, don't let this put you off, because it's not something that it would hinder your progress or anything, but Nest has been designed around the processes and design paradigms that Angular has been designed around. So if you're an Angular developer, you'll probably be able to read this and understand all of the concepts, the modules, the providers, and all of that stuff straight away, because it's very similar to Angular. It's quite cool, because what they've done is, because they've followed that paradigm, a lot of people that are big names with Angular are pushing Nest as a backend framework as well. But that's the disclaimer. It doesn't mean that you have to be an Angular developer to use Nest, and you don't have to use Angular if you're using Nest. So if you are a React developer, you can still use Nest. You don't have to worry. And sorry, I was supposed to go to that. Let me go back to that. So one of the other things that I'd mentioned before was injection. You guys saw that we were injecting a service into a controller, and when you do testing, you often want to mock out your service. What these guys have done in Nest is they've allowed you to create these test modules where you can replace services with mock services. So you can kind of say, cool, this HTTP service that would make a request out, I'm going to mock out that request, and I'm going to return a failed response or whatever you want. So it makes testing a lot easier with this dependency injection. So there's a lot of strength in the way that this system's been designed. And the other strength in it is with the modularity that I mentioned before. You can literally make a tiny module of like a Nest module that you can copy and paste into different projects and stuff and reuse. So it really does help to make sure that you've structured your project right, and that you can reuse what you've done in a previous project in your new one. And as you keep doing that, your development gets faster and faster and faster. So the real world problems. I've told you all the good. Well, not all the good, a little bit of the good, but let's just chat a little bit about the bad that we've hit before. So number one, when you start up this project, you get presented with a source file, and it's up to you to decide how you want to structure your application. That's a pro and a con. For us, it's a pro because we get to decide how we want to structure modules. We decide whether a module should be a main module or a sub-module, or how the whole project gets broken up. It's also a con because it's quite nice for someone to tell you, this is how you should structure your application. And whenever someone else comes onto the project, they should already expect it to look this way, and they'll be able to understand why it's structured that way. So pros and cons, and so I've just put that in there because I think it's difficult when you're working on a project yourself or as a team right from the start. Everyone knows how the project works, and everyone knows where to go when there are problems. When a new person comes on, they've now got to figure out the whole structure of your application. So it's always good to kind of decide what that process and protocol is going to be before you start, and then that will be the definition from that point on. Another problem that we've kind of experienced is queue support and creating your own CLI. Because Nest is in TypeScript, and TypeScript lets you use any NPM package, you can use pretty much any queue, and you can use any CLI platform you want. The problem with that is that, again, you have to then go and implement the queuing logic or the CLI logic. It would be cool if you could just install a package that would give you kind of a skeleton, and you just fill in the blanks, and that's it. You've now got your queue system, and you've got your CLI system. And they have been working on that. For example, there already is a queue plugin that is getting quite popular. With the CLI, I haven't really seen much of that yet. So it's a pro because you literally can do a queue. You can use whatever queue you want, and you can use whatever library you want. The con is that it takes time to then get that whole system up and running. Another problem, which I'm not sure how many people have hit before, but it's flipping annoying, is circular dependency. So you have two modules, module A with service A, module B with service B and C. So service A uses service B uses service C, and service C uses service A. That's your circular dependency. So when your module starts up, it takes service A and it says, cool, you're trying to inject service B. So it tries to inject service B. Service B says, cool, you're trying to inject service C. It tries to inject service C. Service C says, you're trying to inject service A, and now we've got this endless loop. So that doesn't always, that is solvable, because what you do is you kind of do this hack thing where you tell Nest, it's chilled, create the service. I'm going to give you that thing that you need later down the line, and you use forward ref on that. The problem with that is that it does kind of make your code less readable, and you can avoid it by putting proper design principles into all of your modules. But what we've experienced is you're moving so quickly when you're designing things and you're implementing things. You often don't know when two services are going to need each other and stuff like that from different modules. And when you get to that point, it's too late. Well, it's not too late, but you need to do some refactoring. And if your time is not there, you can't do that. So it's just one of those things where you kind of have to keep it in the back of your mind the whole time as you develop. And then the thing is with us is we've just built modules over time that we can now reuse, like email modules and a number of other things. But it's one of those things where you do have to invest time into this to be able to have a fully fledged system that you can then reuse in other projects. And the final thing, which is a bit of a problem, but I think we haven't really struggled with it, is the resources. Like for a lot of the other frameworks that you use out there, you can just go on Udemy, you can search for that framework, and there are plenty of videos that you can watch to get up to scratch with it. Nest is quite new, so the community hasn't really made a lot of resources yet. They're working on it. I think a Nest video or Udemy course just came out like last week, so getting there. And I think everyone is contributing, but we still need like a lot of support and community involved. So that's basically it. Thank you very much. If you guys are looking to get into Nest or start using it, all you have to do is go to the docs page, read through it. You'll see so much functionality and stuff like that. It might be a bit overwhelming, but it's also very refreshing because it means that you can quickly get up a project, and it can be a full system that can be quite complicated, and it's fully scalable, it's reliable, you can break it out, and it works extremely well with containerization like Docker, Kubernetes, and all of that stuff because it's Node, and like a Node Docker file is pretty simple to set up. So yeah, it's just definitely something that I would encourage everyone to look into. If you're ever looking at using Node as your framework and you want to start working on a backend API, Nest is the thing to look at. Cool. Thanks very much.